I'm going to use this mic.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for attending. I'd like to thank our gracious hosts and the other members of this panel. My name is Gene, and in the interest of full disclosure, my day job is selling beer. I work for Vecenie Distributing Company, beer since 1933. When I'm not at work, I am free to drink, appreciate, and espouse the virtues of beer. I'm a beer nerd. Very specific type of nerdism going on here. It is important to keep in mind that unlike the other fine substances presented to you this evening, beer is also a solution. That having been said, you're originally encouraged to go directly to the bar and order any of the fine substances espoused this evening. Substances like Trode's Perpetual IPA. Who knows, maybe one day you'll end up drinking with John Trobner or drinking underneath the 8,000-gallon fermentation tanks. Or beers perhaps like Bell's Oberon, which I had the luxury of consuming at Oberon Day in Kalamazoo, Michigan, just this year. Your work, and I don't see anybody going to the bar. Your work here tonight helps me fulfill this dream of mine. I'd like to start off with this quote. You can't be a real country unless you have a beer and an airline. It helps if you have some kind of football team or some nuclear weapons, but at the very least, you need a beer. All right. 9,000 to 10,000 years ago, the oldest found evidence of beer making. The first beer was probably an accident. Somebody had some grain. Someone left some grain out in the rain. Some yeast infected that grain, fermented it. They consumed that grain, felt good, and thus the onset of moving from a hunting and gathering society to an agrarian society, sticking around in one place for a limited amount of time, began. As early as 18,000 or 1800 BC in Sumeria, the first recipes were created, or that still exist. And it was for beer and or bread to make into beer. This recipe contained wheat berries, date syrup, and barley bread. So it was kind of a combo cider, wine, beer, but it was fermented. That's all they needed to know. Romans knew to scrape the foam off of that liquid that was fermenting and dry it in the sun and reuse it. But they didn't know what the heck it was. So beer is basically water, 95% water, not overly dissimilar from you and I. Malted barley, preferably, or wheat or rye or oats are acceptable as well. Later addition was hops. Hops were more in. Oh, we have some lupophiles in the audience tonight. Excellent. Yes, Cumulus lupulus. I called you up. The cloud came from over there, but Cumulus lupulus being the name, species and genus name for hops. Lupophile becoming the name. And last but no means least, yeast.
Yeast.
So, we got the yeast fan out there. Hey, there's yeast in the air as I speak. Did you know that? It's the yeast we can do. Alright? So, for a really, really long time, they knew to scrape that shit off the top of the beer, save it, dry it out, use it next time, but they didn't know what the heck it was. It took Anton von Leeuwenhoek. Yeah! We got some Anton von Leeuwenhoek fans out, you understand? nice microscopes. But unfortunately, he thought, the father of microbiology, but he thought it was some kind of chemical reaction taking place. It would take almost another 200 years for Louis Pasteur pasteurize that shit. Big Louis Pasteur house, good. To say, hey, no, that's not a chemical reaction. Those are little beings, and they're taking and they're converting sugar into bubbles and alcohol. So, maybe about 500 years ago, this is how old beer is. It's as old as mushrooms or weed, with another complex process taking place, natural process. The Germans invented the Reinheitsgebot, or German purity law. They didn't call it the German purity law at the time because I called it the German purity law, bro. Reinheitsgebot. They said, hey, well, they were actually trying to prevent the use of wheat to make beer for the purpose of making bread with that wheat. Times were tough, and they said there's 3 ingredients in beer: water, that's the big one; malted barley. Maybe you use some rye, maybe you throw a little wheat in there, and hops. Hops became the spice for beer at the time. To the weed guy, what's the closest, one of the closest plant relationships in the plant kingdom? Did you say wheat and hops? You were correct. So even the monks do it. In the Middle Ages, you didn't drink the water. Lord knows what happens to you, but if you boil the heck out of the water with some malt, add some hops, and let it ferment, you wouldn't die of the Black Death. So it was a good thing. Moving on to the New World, this continent. We made beer since day one. There's some theories that the only reason the Mayflower pulled over was because they needed more fermentables. See, if you look at the map right here, we reside firmly within the beer belt. This is the number of U.S. breweries from 1612 to 1840. And what? The Founding Fathers brewed? Not so much. Their slaves brewed for them. Not the Founding Fathers, but they had beer. They were smoking weed, they were drinking beer, writing all those cool documents and shit. Monticello. Monticello. You got a brewery in the basement which was operated by Peter Hemmings. Why does that name stand out? But they brewed. He was a skilled brewer, and our founding fathers most certainly brewed. Tun Tavern in Philadelphia, which was the original brewing capital up until Prohibition, which we'll get to, is where the Marines started, for example. If you wanted beer back in the day, you made it yourself. That's how it worked. So here's a map of breweries in the beer belt. We're right here. You notice the lack of Turner's tea had not been invented at that point to mix it with Iron City, but they made beer just the same. You are firmly within the beer belt. But then, one day, maybe it took about 100 years to develop, but not everybody liked alcohol, in particular beer. These women, lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. And I'm thinking everybody in this room is okay with that. Prohibition, how freaking bad was it actually? I mean, I guess I wasn't alive at the time, but it probably sucked. According to the 18th Amendment, it wasn't actually illegal to consume alcohol or be drunk. Only the manufacturing, transportation, and selling of alcohol was illegal. Necessity being the mother of invention, therein resides the creative solutions that Americans would invent and employ for the 13 years between 1920 and 1933. Breweries had all this brewing equipment to make beer. What the heck are we going to do with this? Let's make some root beer, shall we? Let's make ice cream. Let's figure out what to do with these tanks. People wanted beer this whole time. How bad exactly was Prohibition? I don't know. It gave us some good stuff. In international waters, U.S. government had no dominion. They couldn't stop you from drinking beer. Thus, the booze cruise was invented. Has anyone ever been on a booze cruise? Sounds like yes over this side of the room. Get on the booze cruise, that side of the room. Bahamas, cheap. There were bootleggers. You've heard these terms. Now they're getting thrown back at you. In order to illegally make and deliver alcohol to people, people would take normal-looking cars, hyper-ordinary-looking cars, take out everything but the driver's seat, and fill it with booze, and drive really fast to escape the law. Something that happened as a side product of this, when beer became illegal, or became legal once again, was NASCAR. So we have Prohibition to thank for NASCAR. Let's give Prohibition a big hand, a warm round of applause. Also, Al Capone. Prohibition was very good for Al Capone. He made $100 million a year during Prohibition. We would have never found out what it was not inside Al Capone's vault had he not become someone. Elliot Ness. Has anybody ever heard of Elliot Ness? Or the Untouchables? Only reason is because of Prohibition. Without Prohibition, there would have been no Elliot Ness. Also, the rise in organized crime. Without the rise in organized crime, I would not be able to make all of you an offer you could not refuse. You wouldn't know what the heck I was talking about. You would not be able to take the cannoli and leave the gun. You can just forget about Gabagoo. And think about the memes that were generated from Prohibition. Without Prohibition, this shit would never have happened. If only there were other observations we could make and lessons we could learn as a society about Prohibition in general. But alas. Finally, and most importantly from my selfish perspective, Prohibition allowed for the three-tier system wherein there's a producer of alcohol and a seller of alcohol and a middleman. So the mafia couldn't move in and say, hey, you're selling my shit or else. At which point, I got a job. I mean, I have the job that I have. And I don't mean to brag, but I am getting paid for this right now. So that's where I work. And then one day, the pandemic happened. Not from a beer selling perspective at all. On or about March 16th, in response to the COVID-19 outbreak, pursuant to Management Service Code, Pennsylvania Governor Thomas Wolf declared a disaster emergency and a subsequent prohibition, there's that word again, on operations or businesses that are not life-sustaining. My job was considered life-sustaining. While you guys were all at home, playing Fortnite, pampering your sourdough starter, vilifying Carol Baskin, and participating in Zoom happy hours, hopefully with beer, yours truly was sustaining life itself. It was a life-changing moment. Thank you. God bless you as well. So I think there's a movie being made about me as a life-sustaining element of society. Here comes the trailer if I can play it. And there's supposed to be audio. There we go. That's me. So, I'd like to think you're all essential as well. Beer without a receiving consumer, without someone's palate to taste it, is nothing. It's a tree falling in the forest. So a little bit more about beer. We've come such a long way that now we're in the Smithsonian Institution National Museum of American History Barracks Center, down there in DC, where weed is totally recreationally legal. Get some weed and go visit and check out the barracks. They have all kinds of cool stuff. You have the whole history of American craft beer movement right there. And once again, I'm Gene from Vecenie, and cheers.